Hi everyone! Today we are covering the 3.0 X-Bow mirror matchup, probably one of the most skill-intensive matchups in the game. Now, I know that a lot of people absolutely hate this matchup because honestly, it can feel insanely frustrating to play. One bad cycle, one missed placement, one extra X-Bow hit, and suddenly the entire game feels impossible. But at the same time, that's exactly what makes the mirror so interesting. Unlike a lot of matchups, this one is usually decided by really small advantages. Slightly better cycle control, slightly cleaner defense, or understanding pressure just a tiny bit better than your opponent. Personally, I have around 80% win rate in the mirror matchup, and in this guide I want to break down exactly how I approach it. We'll cover both defensive and offensive playstyles, different ways to pressure depending on your opponent, how to keep your advantage once you get it, and the small details that constantly decide high-level mirror games. So let's get into it. Starting with the obvious one, the X-Bow itself. The hardest part about defending X-Bow in mirror is stopping without giving any tempo or destroying your own cycle. Because if your defense is too expensive, your opponent usually gets control of the next X-Bow sequence immediately. Knight. Knight is mainly dangerous because of how much time it buys for the X-Bow, and if it survives the interaction it becomes extremely annoying in counter pressure, especially when you're already low on elixir after defending. Fireball and Log. Fireball and Log are incredibly strong against defensive structures in the mirror. If you give it too much spell value on defense, your opponent can slowly outcycle and even win through spell damage alone in overtime. Tesla and Archers. Set of evolutions that are designed to make you overspend. They're extremely strong both offensively and defensively, and if you fail to match their cycle properly, you can lose control of the matchup very quickly. Skillis and E-Spirit. And finally, the cycle cards. They seem harmless, but they're amazing at stalling X-Bow, disrupting archers, helping Tesla, and fixing awkward cycles. A lot of mirror interactions are honestly decided by these tiny small support cards. Now, before we get into the actual gameplay, this guide is going to be structured a little differently compared to the previous matchup guides on my channel. Instead of mixing everything together immediately, we will separate the mirror into defensive and offensive playstyles. But before we do that, we need to cover a few general principles that apply to both. The earlier you recognize the matchup, the better. Split archers and early cycle cards are usually a dead giveaway, and once you identify the matchup, your entire mindset should immediately shift into cycle control mode. Always pay attention to evolution cycles. If your opponent is cycling and you're not, you'll slowly lose control of the matchup without even realizing it. In the mirror, every bit of damage matters. Even small amounts of damage can completely change overtime pressure, so clean defense is extremely important. Skeletons and Electrospirit are not just cycle cards here. They are used to stall X-Bow, support kites, disrupt archers, and fix awkward defensive sequences. Some games reward aggressive pressure, others reward patience and defense. Part of mastering the mirror is recognizing which playstyle the game is naturally giving you. One bad overcommit can lose the entire matchup. If your X-Bow push fails and you're down too much elixir, your opponent usually gets immediate control of the game. Kiting is one of the most important mechanics in the mirror. Good kites buy extra time for Tesla, archers, and your cycle to stabilize. Never give unnecessary fireball or log value. Stacking units together makes defending future X-Bows way harder and can completely destroy your cycle. Now, the defensive approach is generally the more safe and comfortable way to play the mirror matchup. It gives you more control over the game, but at the same time it can be predictable, since it's more common and slightly easier style to read. On defense, you usually want the opponent to show their hand first. It gives you information on how they structure X-Bow pushes and how they prefer to build tempo. Clean defense isn't the goal by itself. You want to convert it into counter value, especially through spells, where Fireball and Log can slowly swing control. A defensive X-Bow is one of the best tools to shut down Rhythm. It stops their pushes, forces awkward responses, and can often bait out key spells. If you defend the same way every time, you become predictable. Mixing placements and timings is the key so that they can perfectly set up their X-Bow sequences. Defending in the same lane helps you maximize Fireball and Log value over time. It also keeps interactions compressed, which is usually better for control. If the game drags out, spells become a real win condition. Consistent chip and clean defense often ends games without even breaking through an X-Bow. Evo Archers are your best bailout against aggressive X-Bow. They can stabilize messy defense as well as keep your cycle intact. Every successful defense should create at least some counter pressure threat. Even small counter pushes force responses and delay their next X-Bow. If you only defend, however, you eventually lose control. Even defensive players need to occasionally thread an X-Bow to reset tempo. Starting defense with Knight or Tesla is often too committal. It gives the opponent too much information and can open you up to easy punish timing. The offensive approach, however, is a higher risk, higher reward way to play the mirror. It is more creative and unpredictable, but also easier to punish if you misread the cycle or overcommit. If the opponent starts cycling too aggressively or too fast, you can punish immediately. Early expo pressure can catch them before their cycle is stabilized. Offense isn't just about dropping expo in the same spot. Small adjustments, like placing it one tile higher, can deny spell value and force awkward defenses. Your Skellies and E-Spirit aren't just for defending or cycling. They're used to distract Tesla, disrupt archers, and create openings for expo damage. Sometimes your spells can be used offensively to hit defensive setups early. This can catch opponent off guard and weaken their ability to stabilize your future expos. Creative offense only works if you can track the opponent's cycle properly. If you don't know what they have in hand, your expo pressure becomes predictable and easy to shut down. When you start offensive sequence, don't drop tempo. It's not about spamming expos, it's about chaining pressure at the right timing windows. In order to maximize your offensive efficiency, you need to force out the Evo archers early. This reduces their ability to stabilize and opens up future expo opportunities. The longer you keep offensive pressure going, the more efficient your sequences become. The opponent is forced into reactive play, which usually leads to worse defenses over time. Going opposite lane helps avoid clean spell value and forces split defensive resources. It's especially useful when the opponent is trying to stabilize a single strong defensive setup. Now let's move into the phase breakdown, split into defense and offense, and how each one evolves throughout the game. Starting off with defensive playstyle. In single elixir, you want to focus on pattern recognition and stabilizing your cycle. You're not looking to force anything, just survive cleanly, identify how they pressure, and start reading their timings. Every defense is basically information gathering. How they use expo, how they support it, and how they react to the pressure. Double elixir, however, is where the matchup actually starts to take shape. Your defenses become more structured and efficient. All of your cards start working together more consistently. You also begin looking for situational counter pressure, but only when it doesn't break your defensive cycle. And most importantly, this is where you need to focus on maximizing the spell value every time. Small advantages like that can slowly shift control of the game in your favor. Triple elixir, however, is full control and precision mode. You defend first and everything else comes after that. Spell cycle becomes a major win condition, especially when neither player can break through cleanly. Overcommits and stacked pushes get heavily punished with spells and clean defensive setups, and unless there is a completely free expo opportunity, you generally avoid forcing offense, because losing control here is often game-ending. Now let's move to the offensive playstyle. Single elixir is where early pressure and cycle punishes matter most. If the opponent is overcycling or slightly off tempo, you can punish with quick expos or creative cycle setups before they fully stabilize. Double elixir, however, this is the main offensive phase. You want continuous pressure, chaining expos, and keeping the momentum alive. The goal here is simple: don't give them time to reset. Once you gain even a small advantage, you try to keep forcing reactions and slowly convert it into a real lead. In triple elixir, you slightly shift gears. Offense becomes more controlled and structured. You're not forcing constant expos anymore. Instead, you're protecting the advantage you've already built. You still threaten offense when it's free, but the focus is more on maintaining control and not throwing away cycle or tempo unnecessary. Now that we've covered how both defensive and offensive playstyles evolve through each phase, we can move into the final piece: pressure opportunities, and when you should actually look to force expo sequences instead of just reacting. Once again, let's start with the defensive side first. Your first pressure opportunity would be after clean expo defense. When you fully stop an expo efficiently, that's your first big window. If you still have knight or archers alive, you can convert it into immediate counter pressure or force awkward cycle responses when opponent overcommits. If they invest too much into expo push, that's your punish window. You defend first, then immediately shift into pressure while their cycle is broken, when Tesla or knight is out of cycle. This is one of the most important timing windows in the matchup. In their main defense pieces are out, even a simple expo can force a full defensive scramble after forcing spell usage. If you bait out Fireball on defense, you often get a short window where their defensive structure is weaker. That's usually the cleanest time to apply pressure, when you gain cycle advantage. If you're slightly ahead in cycle, you control the pace of the matchup. This allows you to dictate when expo happens instead of reacting to theirs, when defensive setup survives cleanly. If your defense ends up with surviving archers or knight, that's a natural pressure trigger. You don't just let those units go, you convert them into tempo immediately. Now let's shift into the offensive playstyle. When an opponent is low on cycle, if they don't have their full defensive setup ready, that's your green light. Quick X-Bow pressure can force them into awkward defenses before they can stabilize. After forcing out their Tesla or Knight, if you see Tesla or Knight committed on defense, that's a key timing window. That's when you can re-pressure or set up the next X-Bow before they reset properly. When you predict weak defense rotation, if you track their cycle and know they don't have the right combination ready, you can force X-Bow. This is where the matchup knowledge turns into free damage or control. After successful spell value, if you hit a good fireball or log on defensive units, that's a natural pressure moment. You've already weakened their structure, so you convert that into offense immediately. When you outcycle their defensive core, if you cycle faster, you control the timing of the next X-Bow. This lets you force them into defending without ideal answers ready, when opponent is forced to defend first. If they are reacting instead of initiating, you already have tempo. In the mirror, that alone is often enough to justify X-Bow pressure. Let's wrap it up. The X-Bow mirror matchup is all about small advantages, not necessarily big plays. Cycle control, timings, spell value, and clean micros decide everything. If you lose tempo, you slowly lose control of the game, so the goal is always to dictate when the X-Bow pressure happens. Defense and offense are tightly linked. Every clean defense should become an advantage, and every push needs a proper cycle behind, or it fails. You also have to adapt between patience and aggression depending on the game state, and overall, this matchup is unforgiving. One overcommit or cycle mistake can decide it. If you stay disciplined and convert small edges into control, the mirror becomes much more manageable. Hope you enjoyed this guide. It was the hardest matchup to analyze yet, and I hope that now you will win more of those. That's gonna be all from a very tired me. See y'all next time.